What's the real story? How did all of this come to be? Was it all by chance, or did something or someone design everything? Join us as we learn from our host, William Henry, and discover that the story of the Earth and our universe is really his story.
And welcome to Discovering His Story, a production of Youngstown Christian Television. In this program, we seek to integrate what we find in the Bible with what we find in secular history and see where they overlap and where there may be influences upon one another, thereby gaining insight oftentimes into the biblical record, but also causing us to have greater confidence in what the Bible tells us occurred. Now, we are in the time period known as ancient times. That begins at the time of the creation of the world, which we covered in episode 1. If you have not seen that, I suggest you go back to the archives on the internet page and start there and begin going through ancient history. We find ourselves at the present in the time period of ancient Egypt. And if you've been with us, I hope that you've been fascinated by some of the things that we have discovered concerning ancient Egypt in relationship to several of the biblical characters that found themselves in Egypt. Lastly, we've been looking at what occurred after the plagues of Egypt and the Exodus and the succession of pharaohs following that. And we bring ourselves now to the rule of Ramses II, not the Pharaoh of the Exodus. If you were with us previously, you know that the Pharaoh of the Exodus was Amenhotep II. Ramses II is given credit for being the Pharaoh of the Exodus simply because the cities named in Exodus that the Hebrew slaves were building were named Ramses, or one of them was named Ramses. But that does not mean that Ramses II was the Pharaoh, as recent scholarship has clearly indicated. But Ramses II was a very important figure in ancient history and even in relationship to the land of Israel. He is considered the last very powerful Pharaoh, and he ruled for 67 years. It's thought that Ramses II had 8 royal wives and numerous concubines, and fathered more than 100 children. How would you like to keep those birthdays straight? He built a communal tomb in the Valley of the Kings for many of his children. Because he lived to such a great age, between 90 and 96, he outlived many of his sons, and he wasn't replaced on the throne until they got to son number 13, whose name was Merneptah. Now, he's famous for an Egyptian monument that we'll talk about later, which names Israel. The temples built at Abydos, the Ramesseum, Luxor, and Karnak were all constructed by Ramses, or at least the beginning stages of Karnak. The temple of Karnak was added to by other pharaohs coming after. During the rule of Ramses, we have a topographical list which mentions Shasu, which we've seen before, relates to the area of Canaan or Israel. We have the name Yaakov El, or Jacob El, Asher, which you recognize as one of the tribes of Israel, and Yahweh. And at that point it says Yahweh of the land of the Shasu. He also battled the Hittites at Kadesh, and we're going to look at that in a few minutes. But he's called the Great because he was such a great builder, not only of these temples that I mentioned, but also of statues of himself. And you go around Egypt and you constantly are seeing statues of Ramses II. Here's one found in the area of Memphis. And in this one, it's laying down because the bottom, when it was discovered, the bottom parts of his legs had been broken off, and so he's laying inside a building. Here's another shot of Ramses II statue from up above. By the way, you see that gentleman standing there down on the floor level? Because he stands in your picture, he wants to be paid for it. I didn't. Here's a close-up view of Ramses. What do you notice there? Do you see what's on his shoulder? Do you remember what that is? That's a cartouche. So we have hieroglyphics with an oval around it indicating the name of a pharaoh, and that is his name there on the cartouche. You see the fake beard that pharaohs wore. And just so you get an idea of how large the statue is, I took a picture of my hand next to his. Now I have small hands, but those are enormous. You can see that the rod that he had in his hand that has, of course, been broken since then. Now we go over to the temple at Luxor, and we see more statues of Ramses II at the gateway of the temple of Luxor. Here's more statues of Ramses at Abu Simbel, 4 statues of himself. And here are close-ups of the statues of Ramses II. But I remember traveling along the road and in a bus, and all of a sudden we'd see these statues there alongside the road. I don't know what was there originally, but there were statues of Ramses II. So he was everywhere. This is at Abu Simbel. That's the last picture. Now, he fought a very important battle at the area called Kadesh against the Hittites. We'll talk more about the Hittites later as well, but we want to make sure we insert this here, looking at the progression of the land of ancient Egypt. And during a time period in which Egypt has begun its decline. Ramses II is the last hurrah in a lot of ways of Egypt. And there was a decisive battle that took place for control over the area we call Syria between the Egyptians and the Hittites in the 5th year of the reign of Ramses II. The Battle of Kadesh resulted from the defection of one of the vassal states from Egypt to the Hittites. And so this battle takes place. Well, rather than me tell you about it, sometimes it's more interesting to watch a video. And so we're going to watch this video about Kadesh. Whoops, it's not there quite yet. That's a painting of the battle. This is an outline of the battle, looking at maps of how it progressed. And just generally speaking, you can see if our producer can kind of hone in on this. We see on the left-hand slide that the green is the Egyptian divisions, and they're coming up from the south, from Egypt, and heading toward Kadesh. They're under the impression from capturing a couple of Hittites that the army of the Hittites is quite a ways away, and so they are not a threat. But in reality, if you look at the right-hand side of that same slide on the left, whoops, I accidentally went back. There we go. You see where it says Kadesh, and there's basically a hill there. And the chariots of Kadesh are in the red, shown by the red, and they're behind that hill so the Egyptians don't see them. We look at the next slide on the right. We see that there's some divisions of Egypt coming up as the Hittites have attacked the Pharaoh's army there. And then they are driven off by these divisions. If you lower left, you see the divisions of Pharaoh coming. And then the Amuru brigade arrives and fights against the Hittites as well. And so they are eventually driven back The battle ends somewhat in a draw. Both sides claim victory, but you'll see that as we watch the video.
In year 2 of his reign, Ramses began the first military campaign as pharaoh against the Sea Peoples. These pirates originated from Ionia and were attacking cargo-laden vessels traveling the sea routes to Egypt. Ramses II posted troops and ships at strategic points along the coast and patiently allowed the pirates to attack their perceived prey before skillfully catching them by surprise in a sea battle and capturing them all in a single action. A stele from Tanis speaks of their having come in their warships from the midst of the sea, and none were able to stand before them. Ramses II integrates these warriors into his bodyguard, and on the inscriptions of the Battle of Kadesh, they stand out by their horned helmets, round shields, and large swords. The build-up to the Battle of Kadesh involved his early campaigns into Canaan. The first took place in year 4 and involved a Canaanite prince who was mortally wounded by an Egyptian archer. The Canaanite army was subsequently routed, and these princes were carried off as prisoners to Egypt. During this campaign, Ramses II captured the Hittite vassal state of Amurru. In response, the king of the Hittites, Muwatalli II, marched south into Kadesh to confront the Egyptians. In year 5, Ramses gathered together one of the greatest forces of Egyptian troops ever seen, about 20,000 men who were organized into 4 divisions of 5,000 each, named respectfully after the gods Amun, Ra, Ptah, and Seth. His chariot force numbered around 2,000. Muwatalli II assembled an even greater army with about 20 to 40,000 men and 3,000 chariots. Ramses II set out from his new capital of Paramses and, following in Thutmose III's footsteps some 200 years earlier, moved up through the Gaza Strip. With such a large army, which included the baggage trains and camp followers, the movement north was slow and extended over a vast area. About 7 miles south from Kadesh, Ramses II and the advance guard captured 2 spies who reported that the Hittite army was over 100 miles to the north. Ramses II, therefore, moved forward confidently with the 1st Division Amun, crossing the Orontes River and camping to the west of Kadesh. He was soon shaken, however, when 2 more spies were caught who revealed under torture that the Hittite army was just on the other side of Kadesh. Without time to react, Hittite chariots crossed the river and charged the middle of the Ra division and began making their way to his location. The Ra division was caught in the open and scattered in all directions. The Hittite chariotry then rounded north and attacked the Egyptian camp, crashing through the Amun division, causing panic. Ramses II described this scene of being deserted and left to deal with the enemy alone. No officer was with me, no charioteer, no soldier of the army, no shield bearer. I was before them like Seth in his moment. I found the mass of the chariots in whose midst I was, scattering them before my horses. Although dramatized, Ramses II did personally lead several charges into the Hittite ranks, together with his personal guard, some of the chariots from the Amun division, and survivors from the routed division of Ra. The Hittites, who believed their enemies to be totally routed, stopped to plunder the Egyptian camp, and in doing so became easy targets for Ramses II's counterattack. They drove the looters back towards the Orontes River, while in the ensuing pursuit, the heavier Hittite chariots were easily overtaken and dispatched by the lighter, faster Egyptian chariots. The Prince of Aleppo, fighting with the Hittites, nearly drowned, and his predicament was ridiculed in Egyptian records. Muwatalli II ordered a second attack after quickly regrouping, but abandoned the idea upon observing the Ptah division, which had finally arrived from the south. By this point, nightfall had set in. Like most other ancient armies, they did not fight at night, so both armies settled into their respective camps. The next day, the Egyptians and Hittites fought to a standoff. The Hittite army was ultimately forced to retreat, but the Egyptians were unsuccessful in capturing Kadesh. Logistically unable to support a long siege of the walled city of Kadesh, Ramesses II returned to Egypt. Further campaigns were undertaken against the Hittites in subsequent years, but eventually Ramesses II realized that he could not hold the northern reaches of Syria, just as the Hittites could not control the south. Internal troubles and growing Assyrian threats to the east made the now Hittite king, Hattusili III, cease the annual attacks against Egypt. The running borderland conflicts were finally ended some 15 years after the Battle of Kadesh by an official peace treaty in the 21st year of Ramesses II's reign, roughly 1258 BC. The treaty survives carved on the walls of Karnak and the Ramesseum in Egypt. The Hittite version has also been discovered by one of those coincidences of fate in the Hittite capital at Hattusis. An enlarged replica of the Kadesh Agreement would later hang on the wall of the United Nations headquarters as the earliest international peace treaty known to historians.
Not really be called a battle in the strictest sense of the word, but rather it was more like a large-scale skirmish, which would normally precede a decisive encounter, which in the end never took place. Nevertheless, Muwatalli was able to rob his opponent of the initiative and eliminated about a third of his troops. The failures of Ramses' campaign was a result of his own tactical mistakes. He did not send enough scouts to explore the countryside sufficiently. The divisions were separated by up to 15 kilometers from each other, and there was no adequate protection of the flanks. Still, the king blamed his troops. In the poem of Pentaur, he stated, "Not one of my princes, of my chief men and my great, was with me, not a captain, not a knight. For my warriors and chariots had left me to my fate. Not one was there to take his part in flight. Here I stand, all alone. There was no one at my side. My warriors and chariots afeared have deserted me, none heard my voice when to the craven's eye their king for succor cried. But I find that Ammon's grace is better far to me than 1,000,000 fighting men and 10,000 chariots be." Wow, don't you feel sorry for him? Didn't you almost feel like weeping, hearing of his plight? But one thing I find extremely interesting here, not only is he blaming his troops for his own mistakes, but his finding solace in Ammon's grace. It's hard to know what to make of that. Ammon, which, as I've said before, most likely is the God introduced to Egypt by Abraham as the true God, the Ammon God, and became so dominant so that their chief god was called Ammon-Re. And we find over and over again references to Ammon. We find the name Ammon in many names of pharaohs. And here Ramses II says, "I find that Ammon's grace is better to me than 1,000,000 fighting men and 10,000 chariots be." Almost sounds like something that could be in one of the Psalms, doesn't it? Well, this attack on the army and his leaders was the beginning of the gradual distancing process between army and king, who relied more and more on Ammon and his priesthood. Since the reign of Horemheb, who appointed a general to succeed him, the army command played a decisive role in foreign policy decisions. Ramses II reasserted the royal power in this domain and brought about a rapprochement between Egypt and Hatti, which culminated in the signing of a peace treaty. As far as we know, the first peace treaty in history. In fact, it's even duplicated in the halls of the United Nations as an example of peace between nations. Well, Ramses described the campaign as a splendid victory. while in reality, Kadesh remained in Hittite hands. Amurru fell to the Hittites, and the Egyptian losses were substantial. This peace treaty, though, was witnessed according to the records that were written by the Egyptians, witnessed by 1,000 gods and goddesses of the Hittites, and a similar number from the country of the Nile. Each ruler swore not to invade the territory of the other and to come to the aid of the other should either need assistance. The treaty was apparently satisfactory to both parties since peace did follow. And 13 years later, Hattusilus appeared personally in Egypt to give away his eldest daughter as the wife of Ramses. Now, Ramses almost lost his life. He signed a peace treaty with the Hittites and signed, as we've said, the first recorded non-aggression and mutual defense pact in history around 1250 BC with the Hittites. His marriage to the Hittite princess sealed the deal. And a great bridal procession traveled from the Levant to the city of Per-Ramses Meri Iman in the Nile Delta. And it says this in the record: "Then they brought the daughter of the great prince of Hatti," for the Hittites, "before his majesty. And his majesty saw that she was fair of countenance like a goddess, and he loved her more than anything else." Sweet ending. Well, the Hittites continued to domesticate their horses, using wheels for chariots. They continued to dominate in the area north of the area of Palestine. And the Egyptians lost prestige, especially up in the area of Asia, Asia Minor, we call it, the area of Turkey, where the Hittites were gaining more and more control. In fact, most of the vassals of Palestine revolted in the next few years, and Ramses was forced to begin exactly where his father had almost 30 years before. In time, he regained not only Palestine, but also won battles in Syria, even north of Kadesh. And then after 15 years of campaigning, Ramses' war with the Hittites suddenly ended. And that brings us to his successor, who is Merneptah. His name means beloved of Ptah, who is considered the creator god. He succeeded his father, as we said before, at an old age himself, because his father lived to between 90 and 96. So he didn't rule very long because he didn't live very long after that. And he was generally ineffective. His one notable act came in response to unrest commensurate with the waning power of his father during his later years, as the Canaanite king of Gezer sought to achieve power in the region. Merneptah acted with a devastating campaign against Gezer and like-minded rebellious groups, including early Israel, who posed a threat to Egyptian control. As a result of this, we have the Merneptah Stela, with the first extra-biblical mention of Israel. This is key, showing that Israel was already in Canaan by 1210 BC, which again fits into the timeline that we have been advocating for a number of episodes. There's possible mention of this particular Pharaoh in Joshua 15:9, which reads, "From the top of the mountain, the border curved to the spring of the waters of Nephtoah and proceeded to the cities of Mount Ephron, and the border curved to Baalah," that is Kiriath Jearim. This Nephtoah might be the Pharaoh that we have in mind here, as well as in Joshua 18:15. "Then the south side was from the edge of Kiriath Jearim, and the border went westward and went to the fountain of the waters of Nephtoah." This is a hieroglyphic description of the battles that took place. This one shows Merneptah binding Shasu prisoners, which might be Hebrews or at least people up in that area. They were depicted as a desert-dwelling people with beards, wearing short, often tasseled kilts or ankle-length garments and turbans. And then the texts flanking the scene are largely rhetorical, praising the virtues of the king. They say in part, "Strong bull, sharp-horned and resolute, who treads down the Asiatics. He causes the chiefs of Kuru," which would be Palestine, "to cease all boasting with their mouths." And then here's another hieroglyph. This one is also of the battles in Canaan. This is part of a larger scene which originally would have depicted Mereneptah presenting captives to the god Ammon. A text from a loose block which may belong to the scene reads in part, "Presentation of tribute by His Majesty to his father Ammon, when he returned from the land of despicable retinue," which would be Syria, "and the chiefs of the foreign lands." So, these are possibly the earliest pictures of Israel which can be found at the Temple of Karnak. So there are two indisputable facts that Old Testament scholars must face when dealing with these hieroglyphic references to the Shasu of Yahweh. First, there's no doubt that the name of the Israelite God Yahweh appears in these hieroglyphic texts at Solub and Amara West, and also probably at Medinat Habu. And second, at Solub, the reference to Yahweh dates to around 1400 BC, during the reign of Pharaoh Amenhotep III. In other words, Pharaoh Amenhotep III, or at least his scribes, must have at least heard about the Hebrew God Yahweh in around 1400 BC. This fact is highly significant when trying to date the exodus of the Israelites from Egypt under Moses. And if you've been with us throughout this look at ancient Egypt, you can see that not only that, but also the lives and the events of what occurred matches up exactly with what the book of Exodus indicates. Well, we can run through some other pharaohs real quickly, most of which have no significance until we get to Ramses III. He's the last of the mighty rulers of the New Kingdom, and he conducts what is called a war with the sea people. And so we'll be looking at another video next time to give us information about this war and find out just who are these sea people and where do we see them in the biblical text and what are they called there? Well, Ramses III is able to gain victory over these people, and we're going to see that they land to live in a place that causes much consternation to the Hebrew people. Well, we'll find out about them and some of their background, because I think we can figure out just where they came from and maybe how popular they were in some of the ancient records. So I hope that you'll join us as we continue our look at Egypt. We're going to finish up ancient Egypt next time as we look at this final last battle, and then we're going to begin looking at the land of Canaan. We'll go back a little bit to where the Israelites entered the land and talk about the peoples that they found there and what occurred, what God did in order to give them prominence over that area. Next time on Discovering His Story.
What's the real story? How did all of this come to be? Was it all by chance, or did something or someone design everything? Join us as we learn from our host, William Henry, and discover that the story of the earth and our universe is really his story. Okay, tax time again. What's it going to cost me this year? Well, that seems high. That's a lot more than I thought. Is everyone this expensive? Here's a local company. Let's check them out. They've been around for 15 years. Average fee less than $79. I'm going to Tax 29. They have an office near me.